Hello, seventh graders. We are going to start chapter 8 today. Chapter 8 has all of the things about populations: human populations, plant populations, bacteria populations, deer populations, fish populations. Populations. This is kind of cool because we usually get to this chapter in the spring. In the springtime, everything comes alive in Pennsylvania, and the populations of insects explode. The fish population goes up, the deer population goes up, the frogs, all of this stuff starts to become alive, and it makes this really hit home if you think about the wild area that we live in. So we're going to talk about the characteristics of a population today. This is all under population dynamics, which is the study of how populations change. When we're done, you're going to read that first section of chapter 8, which is page 241 to 248. The worksheet will pop up in the Google Classroom. Populations have characteristics. Population dynamics is the study of why populations change and what causes them to change. Populations are continuously in 3 stages of growth. There's 3 stages: growth, stability, and decline. The human population has been steadily growing over the last 100 and some years, while certain fish populations has been declining. And a lot of scientists spend a lot of time studying on growth and decline of species. All populations get their resources, food, water, energy, mates, from the environment. Each type of organism needs a different set of required resources. Make sure that you are watching the videos at home. I can't play them and do the lesson. The amount of resources in an area determines an organism's population carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is the maximum number of organisms that can live in an area. Think about a carrying capacity like a bucket. Your bucket can only hold so much water. When you reach the top of the bucket and you add more water, the water drips over. Well, at carrying capacity, you're going to not be able to hold any more water. The bucket is at capacity. So think of some resources that you can get from the environment. Maybe you're a deer, maybe you're a frog. If you're a frog, you need water, you need plants, you need insects, right? Well, those are some of your resources. You also need temperature. Frogs are ectothermic. They're cold-blooded. They need heat from the environment to be alive. Carrying capacity. Like I said, think of a bucket. Carrying capacity is the size of the bucket. And then the bucket isn't holding water, it's holding the number of organisms in an area. It has to be of a certain specific species. It's not multiple species in one carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is the maximum number of individuals an ecosystem can support. When there are enough resources to meet the needs of a population, the population will grow. It looks like this. You start, the population is going to start to grow, and then it will level out. Here's the growth. This part up here on a graph is what we call carrying capacity. Many types of organisms will hit that carrying capacity and just stay right along the carrying capacity of their environment. Sometimes you'll have that decline. Now, if this would become decline, instead of this being here, it drops that way. That's decline. Another video to watch. These are the phases of population growth. Do you remember what the names of each phase are? A, B, and C. Write them in your notes now. A was growth, B was stability, C was decline. This is a special type of growth. This is more of what the human population growth looks like. And this is the kind of growth that you're going to get with bacteria and algae. if you've ever had a fish tank, you can literally look at your fish tank and it looks fine one day and come back 2 days later and your fish tank's got green spots almost everywhere. Because populations of algae, populations of bacteria can literally go through this exponential growth or logarithmic growth. As you guys get on in your algebra, you'll talk about logarithms. Logarithms are in powers of 10. And it literally jumps super, super fast. They call it an algal bloom. They can explode in their population. All right, now this is a gradual growth curve. Some types of advanced biology will call this the S curve. You have A, you have B, and you have C. Each one of these is a certain part. Make sure you're filling this in. A is rapid growth right here. B, this section from here to here, is where your limiting factors kick in. If it's the deer population, it could be predators, it could be disease, it could be hunters. And when you hit this long, steady spot at C, that is carrying capacity. You guys can draw that. Growth, stability, and decline. I know this should be a little bit more straight, but my artwork on the computer is never that good. But I did my best. Charles Darwin did a lot with populations of species because within the population there are competitions that drive evolution. Remember we talked about this in chapter 6. He said that there are certain characteristics of populations of any species that are going to happen. His first statement was that all populations are able to grow rapidly. If conditions are right, if there's lots of water, if there's lots of sunlight, if there's lots of nutrients in the soil, plants can grow rapidly. If the plants are growing rapidly, the organisms that eat those plants, their populations can rise rapidly. Everything depends on the rest of the environment around it. He said that populations will tend to remain in a constant size. When they're done with that rapid growth, they will hit a point that we call the carrying capacity where they will level off and stay at around that constant size. There are limits to natural resources. This was Darwin's premise on competition. There are only so many pieces of pizza to go around. Remember, I spend lots of my life with football players. There's never enough pizza for all the football players. And within a given population, there is genetic variation. We talked about mutation. A mutation is any change in DNA. Those little changes in DNA can become what we call variation. Maybe they give you a little bit better hearing, a little bit better eyesight. Maybe you're a bear and your claws are just a little bit sharper so that you can catch more prey. If you have some of those little genetic variations that can help you survive, it will help you pass on those variations to your offspring. If a birth rate does not match the death rate, so in other words, if you don't have the same number of organisms being born as are dying, population can decline to being extinct. You know, we talk a lot about endangered species and other classes. Pandas, elephants, rhinoceros, Siberian tigers. Very low numbers of organisms. Their habitat is so destroyed or they've been overhunted that they can't reproduce fast enough to get their populations to be as sustainable. And there are organisms going extinct all the time. There are 4 characteristics of a population. These 4 characteristics that we're about to go over will give scientists a clue. Will that population be healthy? Will it start to grow? Will that population be unhealthy? Or is it at a place where it's going to maintain its population size? Before you can tell if a population size is going to grow or not, you have to know how many of organisms are there. This is really important. We are now doing the 2020 census. The government is doing it currently. That is where they count the number of people and where they live in different places in the United States. The entire United States is going to be counted. That will give them a population size. So you can count the population of Bellwood. It's like 4,000 people live in Bellwood. That's the population size. Now, if you're talking about deer, it can be the population of white-tailed deer on Blandberg Mountain. All of your populations are almost always affected by temperature and rainfall. Now, if you're at the bottom of the ocean, it may not be quite that way. Population density is a measure of the number of individuals in a population in a certain space and time. We, here in Bellwood, have a much lower population density than Altoona does. The houses are much tighter. There's a lot more people living in a smaller area. If you head up the mountain, the people that live in Glendale or the people that live in Sinking Valley are much more spread out. Their population density is much lower. You have less people living per square mile. If you go to New York City, you literally have thousands of people living in a small space. You know, one giant high-rise might have several thousand people living in it. You have millions of people living in New York City in a relatively small area. It has a very high population density. To have population density, the key to this one is a measure in a certain amount of area. It can be square miles, it can be square kilometers, but it's some sort of area. So it's usually in a distance squared. If the population size increases, this is the time of year where fawns are going to be born. When deer have their fawns, what is going to happen to the size of the population? Well, when a deer has babies and they have their fawns now, the population of deer will go up. The habitat can't go any further. The deer's habitat is not expanding. They're not getting any more woods to live in. So this is the time of year when the deer population density is high. If the population size decreases, like say October, November, December, when hunting season happens, when that population decreases, you will have less population density. Or if you actually somehow increase it, population density can vary within the organisms. We have population spacing. Population spacing, there are distinct patterns of organisms and distributions. Clumped are going to be like herds or schools of fish. Uniform are evenly spread out. These are going to be like dandelions. Well, no, they're random. Dandelions are random. Uniform will be like saguaro cactuses, and penguins actually can do that. And then random are your dandelions that just spread out wherever they feel like it. I found these drawings to illustrate clumps of organisms here, random here, evenly spread out there. Uniform. So here's some examples of clumped: pack of wolves, school of fish, herd of elephants. That's a creosote bush. They're very uniform because they drop chemicals around them that kills everything else off, so they get very random or very uniform. And penguins are very, very uniform in how they space themselves out. They make sure everyone has the same amount of space. And then dandelions, in case you forgot what they are, they're completely random on where their seeds fall. Last but not least, when predicting if the size is going to grow, you need to know, is the age structure pre-reproductive, reproductive, or post-reproductive? There are many countries that do not make it all the way. Their average population doesn't make it long enough. There are so many people dying in certain parts of Africa that they don't make it to the reproductive age. Very few people make it to the post-reproductive age because of all of the poor conditions, war, lack of water, lack of food, drought, famine. Pre-reproductive, when you're too young to be having babies. If you have a lot of a population that's pre-reproductive and reproductive age, most scientists will agree that that population is going to grow in the future because you have people that are able to reproduce and some more coming into the area that are going to be able to reproduce. If the population becomes too old, the population may decline. We use all four of those characteristics to work together to figure out population growth. All right, ladies and gentlemen, make sure you get your work done for me. The worksheet is 8.1, and I'll be seeing you soon. Thank you.